Instead, I know a good way to scare you away from sneaking into the employee lounge for good. A nice little scary work story. You know, drives to work are always long, leaving your comfortable home on a journey to an uncomfortable place, all the while contemplating your life decisions. However, according to this allegedly true story someone shared with me, this employee's drive to work became quite the nightmare. Enjoy this tale from the break room. The longest drive to work, from Bailey F. This story happened to me a few years ago, so the details may be a bit shaky, and I apologize for that. At the time, I was working at a bakery across town from me. The drive there, or from there to home, would usually take anywhere from 30 minutes to sometimes 40 or even 50, if traffic was really bad that day. Because of this, I always tried to get to work a little early, as I'd rather be there early than late. So I woke up very early to get started, well before I needed to, in case anything came up on those mornings. Usually, I would wake up around 4 a.m., take a hot shower or cold shower depending on the temperature and how awake I was. Then I would sit in the living room and silently eat to not wake up my family. For the most part, I enjoyed these mornings. As I drove, I started to say, at least I think I was speaking. Oddly enough, it still felt warm though, like the embers that burnt it were still hot. Looked of interest, plus even a sentence by the time it actually came out. I tried the doorknob, but it was locked. Then I knocked a few more times before having another look around. There was a car parked in the backyard, overgrown with cobwebs and plants. It looked as if it hadn't run in decades. No license plate or anything. I had decided to try the door handle, and surprisingly, it popped open. It smelled rancid in there though, so I closed it back up and covered my nose. I peeked inside the car, but it just looked old and run down. Nothing out of the ordinary, probably rats inside, I thought. I knocked on the back door of the house and tried to open it, but alas, it was locked too. I wandered back to my car feeling a bit defeated and decided to try another of the buildings. I drove down to the greenhouse. Its glass windows were shattered. This one was completely overrun by wildness, reclaimed by nature. Again though, nothing looked of interest, plus I didn't want to risk falling into the glass lying about the building. Lastly, I went to the adobe house. I tried the door and it opened, but it was burnt to a crisp on the inside. Oddly enough, it still felt warm though, like the embers that burnt it were still hot. The floor crunched as I walked around in the ash. I was relieved when I didn't find any burnt bodies in the bedrooms. I spent some time in there, just taking in the sights. It had a haunting sort of beauty to it. By the time I got back to the car, it felt as if an entire day had passed. I decided to try to call everyone again, but still nothing. The sun still glowed from beyond the clouds in the same spot. The road was still empty, and I was still all alone. I walked the road again, always returning to my car in the middle of the road. I was curious as to how it worked exactly, but ultimately I just felt crazy trying to understand it, and I was exhausted. I didn't want to sleep here, not intentionally. That felt like giving up, like accepting what had happened to me. So I just drove for a bit to clear my head. I turned and drove back to the original direction I went. Slowly, calmly, just a still drive to have something to do. I drove for a while, trying to load up YouTube videos or music, and none of them would play. So I sang to myself as I drove, in my raspy and torn voice. I tried to enjoy myself, but I still found myself crying throughout. I wanted my family and friends back, to hold my girlfriend, to go to work and have a normal day, be back to my normal, boring life. But as I drove, I eventually caught a glimpse of something in the distance. Something caught my eye, a traffic light. I raced towards it, reinvigorated with hope, slamming my foot down hard. But no matter how many instances of the houses and trees I passed, it seemed to stay the same distance away. I wanted to give up at that point. The road had won, it had broken me. I began to laugh like a crazy person. I didn't know what to do. No reaction felt right other than to laugh. It was funny at the time. Somehow that traumatic and horrific moment was funny when I thought about it. Looking back now, it really wasn't. But in the moment, I couldn't think of anything more hilarious. I stopped pressing on at some point. I think I was still laughing then. Eventually, I had one last-ditch effort come to mind. I put the car in reverse and drove backwards along the road. I went past the landmarks in reverse order. Then I looked up. I almost couldn't breathe. There was the stoplight. And suddenly another car honked at me. I looked behind and I was simply reversing at a green light. I slammed onto the brakes and put the car into drive. Somehow, the road continued as it normally should have, and I was able to pass those landmarks. My heart thudded as I passed the last one. Then a wave of relief washed over me as I spied my bakery up ahead. The road had finally continued on, like normal. I pulled into the parking lot in the back and sighed in relief, crying tears of joy. I grabbed my phone and looked at it. The video hadn't finished playing yet, and the time read 7:20 a.m. now. Despite everything, I was there early. I decided to just go to work that day, wanting everything to feel normal. I told my coworkers that some family drama was the reason I'd been crying, and I'd actually gotten to go home early that day because we were overstaffed, despite it being our busy season. I didn't tell anyone about it. My family doesn't really believe in those sorts of things, and my friends aren't much more of believers. But I thought this would be a good place to share it with more open-minded folks, with people who may have had similar supernatural experiences. Nothing like this has ever happened to me since, thankfully. If you ask me, I think I was caught in some weird time loop or glitch in the Matrix or something. I didn't believe in those at all before, thinking that people who posted and told such stories were just making them up. But after this happened to me, let's just say I believe differently now. However, I've also found it a lot harder to drive anymore. I didn't tell my therapist what really happened, in fear of her thinking I was crazy or something. But I told her instead that I'd gotten lost and ended up in a bad accident. I've since been diagnosed with PTSD from the quote-unquote accident.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Oh, hey, welcome back to Dead and Roasted. I was just about to start my break. I definitely need it today. I popped my third kidney and needed a break to settle it back down. That's what I get for trying our new Brappuccino. That thing has a little too much kick. But you're just in time, because today I've got several new, scary, and allegedly true work stories from some of my acquaintances. I've got stories about horrors at hospitals, paranormal prisoners, and even one of my now all-time favorite stories about an old man with one terrifying swing. Get comfy, avoid those Brappuccinos, and enjoy these tales from the break room. Almost killed by a war veteran. From Hospital Makeout. I work in a long-term care facility, a really big one with a full restaurant-style kitchen and housekeeping. I work NOCs, which means night shift, 10:30 p.m. to 8 a.m., no lunch included. Most nights we have a resident or two possibly up, but as the majority are completely with it and mobile, that really doesn't matter. Also, a lot of stuff happens at night, so that's kind of gross and something we have to keep in mind. Well, one night I was in the break room. It was about 2 a.m. and I just got done doing rounds. We go to check to see if any bed-bound people need changing. I was alone at the moment because my coworker was in the kitchen getting some food. The door to the break room, which had been slightly ajar, was thrown hard against the wall. My back was to it, so I turned around thinking my coworker came back and was trying to scare me. Nope. Instead, there stands an old man with a muscular build and a cane in the air. He had severe PTSD, sundowners, and dementia. He takes one look at me and yells, "I'm gonna beat you to death." My reaction was like, that doesn't sound fun. He slammed the cane down against our file cabinet. Suddenly I realize he's in the only exit, and all that's behind me is a small desk. He brings that cane down again, saying, "You messed with the wrong person." He brings the cane back up, preparing for another strike. He screams. I see just red in his eyes. I can feel the hand of God leaving me at that point. He starts to walk further into the room. I tell the guy, "I just work here, I'm new." He replies, "That's the last lie you ever tell." Then he brings the cane all the way back and break me in half position. Then my coworker appears behind him, chiming in, "Hey, stop playing around and go to bed." He stops and looks, saying, "No, she needs to die." Then my coworker replies, "You can do that in the morning, okay? Go to bed." Suddenly, he stops. He turns around and walks away like I never existed in the first place. I'm standing there, my soul hiding under the desk, and my coworker looks me dead in the face, saying, "You're new, that's all." It's been 5 years since then, and the sound of a cane against metal still scares me. He was nice as heck during the day, though, so I guess that's cool. It's not there. From Jonah R. Between 1999 and 2006, I served my community as a detention deputy. As you might imagine, I have a lot of stories, most of them neither fun nor funny. But there were a couple that were downright terrifying. I decided to become a jail guard when it was announced a jail would be opening up in my hometown. After I left the service, I'd only had a couple of part-time jobs. Not anything one would consider a career. During this time, I met a beautiful woman who agreed to become my wife. Working for tips as a waiter was not going to cut it anymore. So away I went to college to earn the right to wear a badge. Once I finished my training, I was off to jail, thankfully on the right side of the bars. When the new jail neared completion, the higher-ups decided to have a deputy stationed there to keep an eye on the place. If I could get that assignment, I'd get to work unsupervised and be 5 minutes away from my house. I couldn't raise my hand fast enough. Now that I think back on it, I wish I'd kept my hand down. The main part of the jail is laid out like a V, with dorms consistently placed on either side of the V, and master control was located at the base of the V. Master control is just what it sounds like. It's the room where primary access control is handled. After checking everything was in place, I settled in for the night. I had snacks, soda, a new book I was looking forward to reading. Keep in mind this was before the iPhone Wi-Fi era. Other than being bored to tears, I didn't have anything to worry about. Or so I thought. We were required to walk down the corridors and into each of the dorms every few hours. I never liked walking down the main corridors. All that empty space was unnerving. I know it's super cliche, but I always got the feeling someone was sitting up in the master control watching me walk around. It felt like someone back there was watching over me, someone who wasn't actually there. I brushed it off, manned up, and did my rounds. One night I was halfway down the first corridor when I realized I hadn't unlocked the doors before I'd left master control. I groaned. That meant I'd have to unlock all the doors manually. Pop. The door to my left creaked open. Inside, I could hear the doors to each of the 2 dorms also open. What in the world? I thought. It was a new facility, and there were bound to be a few bugs, so I double-checked to make sure I had the master keys in my pocket before heading in to shut the inner doors and closing the main hallway door. It would have been kind of embarrassing if I locked myself in, especially for 12 hours. Checked and secured, I moved on. Pop, pop. This time it was the primary doors on both sides of the hallway. Just as they had before, the doors in front of me began to open. If something happens once, you can just blow it off, but if something happens twice, at exactly the precise time you're about to do something, that is not a coincidence. Meanwhile, I still felt those non-existent eyes crawling up the back of my neck. Working in law enforcement, in any capacity, can be a soul-sucking experience. You get used to ugly and scary, but this was a different kind of scary. I didn't know what the hell was going on. Like I said, the first time it happened, it was relatively easy to shake off. I figured they were using some sort of new motion-sensitive system or something. I called my supervisor the next day, asking him if that happened to be the case. Nah, no way, man. We'd never use something like that. After making it clear that was the stupidest thing he'd ever heard, think about having a motion-sensitive system in a jail for a minute. He asked me why I was asking. I made up something about noticing some equipment in the control rooms and wanting to know what they were. He scoffed. You've taken the courses on how to operate those systems. Heck, you know more about how things work down there than I do. I could feel the sarcasm pouring out of the phone. He could give me crap all he wanted so long as he saved me that 45-minute drive. The following night, I decided to wait a while before doing my rounds. I paid extra close attention to the CCTV cameras. This was back in the early 2000s and I was with a county agency, so we're not talking NSA-level tech here. I watched, and after a while I finally cracked my book open. But then, the doors began opening again. I couldn't hear them opening. I first noticed it when I saw motion on the screens. My head yanked up to the sight of 3 doors slowly opening. I steeled myself, grabbing my keys and going down to close those doors. But things were different this time. Instead of just feeling someone watching me, I swear I saw movement in master control when I glanced back over my shoulder. Racing back, I was greeted to the sight of an empty room filled with mindlessly flickering screens. That day, keep in mind I worked 12-hour shifts at night, I dreamt I was in one of the dorms and I had a ring full of keys, but none of them would open any of the doors. Then the dream went on what I could only call endless desperation loop. I kept trying to get out using the keys, any of the keys, but none of them would open any of the doors. I was starting to get rattled. These sorts of events kept happening. As the day of the jail's opening drew closer, I started to believe there was someone living in that jail. Maybe a homeless person, desperate for a place to stay, had taken up residence there. But no matter how hard I searched, I could not find anyone. Finally, my time watching over the creepy place drew to a close. My last day, or rather my last night, finally came around. The sun began to warm the skies off in the horizon, and I could see the lights from the relief officer's car as he pulled into the parking lot. It's not there. The words had come out of nowhere and had been spoken directly into my ear. I jumped up, causing the chair to fly across the room. I rushed around, checking every screen of every monitor in the room. Nothing. So, what's going on? The oncoming officer asked me as he entered the room. I sighed. Nothing, I said, packing up my things and heading out. When you leave the control room, the entryway to the 2 main hallways is on the left, and the main exit is on the right. As there weren't any inmates in the facility yet, we left the hallway door open. As I stepped out, I stopped for a second to adjust the strap on my backpack. As I turned to leave, I heard someone say, "It's not there." The words echoed down the halls. I quickly turned and looked up at the other officer to find him frantically looking over the monitors, down toward me and down the hallways. I didn't know if the other officers were playing a game on me, and the guy who just took over was in on it. So rather than get punked, I just gave him a wave and headed out. Whatever was going on, at least I knew it wasn't just me. Soon the jail was stocked full of alleged evildoers, and you couldn't hear yourself think, let alone some ethereal convict trying to find something he lost. Not long after that, I resigned, taking up a job with another sheriff's office. That was 20+ years ago, but even after all that time, I still think back on those days and shudder. Hospital Haunt from Mortis79. Some time ago, I went to school for nursing. When I graduated, I was hired by the same hospital that I did some of my clinicals at. I live in a small rural town, and this hospital has been around longer than me, about 70 or more years, I believe. I started working on the second floor of the hospital at first. There are 3 halls in front of the nurse's station, one to the left, one to the right, and one straight ahead. The second week I was at the nurse's station doing some charting when down the left hall that was straight ahead of my desk, I catch movement out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was the CNA getting vitals. Then I see what appears to be an older woman in an old-looking nurse's uniform, complete with the old nurse's cap, which we don't even wear anymore. I asked my friend, "Who is that?" He asked, "Who?" "The lady in the old white uniform." He looked at me funny. "Who told you?" I asked what he was talking about. He then explained to me, "We've all heard or seen the lady in white. She's been seen on all the floors. Nobody knows who she is." That was just the start of my experience with her. At one point, I went down the hall to check on my patients. At the end of the hallway, there is a room for families to sit and wait in for the doctor. I saw flashing lights, so we went to see what was going on. Through a window, I saw that there was a wreck down the road. Then, the silence was broken by someone whispering in my ear, "Hey." I turned quickly, but when I looked, no one was there. A few months later, I would be moved to the 3rd floor. One day when the head RN, the security guard, and I were sitting in the nurse's office in a locked unit. We happened to look up, and we saw a black shadow walking down the hallway. I looked them to confirm if they saw it too. They replied yes, they definitely did. On another occasion, the RN was facing the monitor while I was talking to him. Suddenly, he said, "Well, she's up again. I'll go take care of her." He was referring to a patient with dementia who would often leave her room. As he turned around, there was no one there. He told me he swore he saw a woman come out of the room on camera, but when he checked again, she was sleeping and hadn't moved. The last encounter happened when an RN and I were talking at the nurse's station, and the med room door slammed shut. I went to open it and looked around, but of course it was empty. The RN pulled up her phone and started recording, saying, "If that was you, please do it again." At first, nothing happened. Then, slam, the door was slammed shut again. On that same floor, one night I was all alone, waiting in case we got some patients in. It was dark at the time, and I was at the nurse's station, bored, playing solitaire on the old computer. All of a sudden, all the call lights began going off. There was no one on the entire floor. I called my charge nurse and told her I was going home, that if we got a patient in, they could call me. She laughed and said that's fine. She too had had many experiences there. Working at that hospital, there were so many instances of feeling like you were being watched, or like you were being touched by someone that wasn't there. However, the entire time I worked there, it never felt threatening. I don't work there anymore, but sometimes I do miss the lady in white. Sounds you don't want to hear in a hospital. From Julie H. Back in the day, I used to work at a hospital for the rehabilitation department. The main department area that we were located at was where we'd sit to document and unwind after seeing patients. It was our escape from the usual, as well as the not-so-usual hospital chaos. Our safe space. Before the rehab department moved in, the area used to be labor and delivery, with a small offshoot for critical pediatrics. Over the years, some of my former coworkers would complain about doors suddenly slamming shut or random computers turning off when others kept working. A few certain individuals shared with me their experiences. Later into the evening one day, one speech pathologist heard crying in the hallway. It sounded like a small baby. She ran to go see if anyone needed some help. Once out there, she couldn't find anyone there, let alone what could have been the source of that crying. On her way back, though, she heard giggling. Then her door slammed shut, right in front of her. Another coworker, another speech pathologist, would hear the giggling and crying towards the evening. At that point, word had spread about the mysterious noises, so he didn't bother getting up. But as the cries and giggles were ignored, the doors would start to slam, and computers began to act up, having problems. At one point, he swore that out of the corner of his eye, he saw small children looking at him near the doors. Over the years, as the department kept growing with more people, there was less opportunity for people to be by themselves. The whispers and sounds started to fade with time. Doors would still slam shut, but that became due to them being replaced and being able to open and close electronically. By the time I was hired, the stories were years old, and most of the older crew were retiring. The newer crowd had heard minor sounds, but waved it away as sounds of the hospital. It was just silly ghost stories to unnerve the younger people. After all, some said, it was the speech pathologists that had issues, then they would laugh. But the older crew that stayed on remembered the whispers, the giggles, the cries. They remembered the doors slamming shut. The exceptional few remembered the children staring, just out of the corner of their eyes. Just enough in view to remind them, in that frigidly cold, seemingly empty room, they were not alone. They were never alone. And perhaps they would never be alone again. Child on the Bridge. From Fox. It was 2 years ago. I had just gotten done with my closing shift at the restaurant I work at. I don't drive, so most days I'll ride my bike the half-hour trip to work. Because when I close, the ride home at midnight is nice and relaxing after a stressful day of work. Well, that day was different. I finished up my work and got changed into my biking clothes. At the time, I was listening to the book It by Stephen King as I was on a horror binge. Well, that night was a night that listening to horror would freak me out more than usual. The first half of my bike ride was uneventful as usual. Just the nice, relaxing sounds of my book and the night. Now, there's a bridge I have to go over that goes over the Colorado River. I cross it to get home. This bridge is steep, so usually I step off my bike and walk up the bridge, which also lets me take in the night air and the beauty of the moon over the river. Well, that night, as I'm about halfway up the bridge, I start to hear the sound of a child crying. At first, I think it's just my book, so I continue walking. Then I hear the sound again. This time I get uneasy, feeling like something is wrong. So I take my earbuds out to see if it's just my book. When I hear the sound again, I decide to cross over the other side of the bridge to shore where the crying seems to be coming from, to see if I could find anything out of the ordinary. The shore on the river consists mostly of rock and some tall grass. I could still hear the sound, but I didn't see anything on the bank. So I kept walking, getting higher on the bridge to see if I can see anything down there. I wanted to go down myself and take a look, but I also didn't want to risk getting myself hurt, so I continued the last 10 minutes or so home with that sound in the back of my mind. I got home pretty creeped out about what happened, so I got on my computer and played some games for a couple of hours and went to bed. I didn't even think to call the police to report it. The next morning, I told my mom what happened, and she thought it was weird, but at least she believed me that I really did hear something that night. My dad and brother thought I was crazy, but I still remember what happened to this day. Ghost in the Warehouse from TDN. I used to work in an auto parts warehouse for about 2 years. In that time, I experienced a few unexplainable and possibly paranormal occurrences, either completely alone or with a friend or two. I started back in December of 2020. I had just lost my grandmother to COVID-19, which will have some relevance in a second. I came back to work probably earlier than I should have, after being off for only a week to grieve. I was using work to just block everything out that was going on. So when I saw what I saw, I chalked it up to grief and shock taking over my brain. I was working on some car parts one day, just labeling and scanning parts and putting them in bins. I turned towards one of the bay doors behind me, specifically number 20, which is where I always saw it. And for a split second, I saw a human-shaped figure. But it was too quick to catch, because as soon as I focused on it, it was gone. As I stated before, I saw it more than just that once, but for every time I saw it, it just made me continue to think that I was just in shock over my grandmother's passing. That was until my friend/coworker was working with me one day at the same computer. We were just scanning parts as per usual, listening to music and zoning out. Then he just stops in his tracks and looks towards Bay 20. He turns to me and says, did you see that? I instantly knew what he was talking about, or at least I'd hoped I knew. You mean the shadow guy next to Bay 20? Yeah, he's always hiding over there. I said it as a joke, because honestly I didn't expect him to agree with me. But he did, and the face he gave me was that of utter confusion and disbelief. We saw the shadow guy a bunch more times after that, but it was nothing more than just us seeing a glimpse of him, and then nothing. 2 other coworkers also came up to me asking if I saw the shadow guy by Bay 20, so it was nice to know it wasn't just me. The second occurrence was something I really didn't ever expect to experience. This one I still can't get over or explain. Our job required us to work one mandatory Saturday every month. Overtime was included, and it was only 4 hours just to make up some extra work. Plus, they usually bought pizza at the end of the shift, so it was actually pretty nice. People left you alone. You zone out, listen to a podcast, and just label car parts. But the one thing that sucked was that it was just receiving and picking that were doing anything. There were 2 pickers and the receiving team, which included me, so the rest of the warehouse was completely empty. You also needed a key to get in if you went outside at all during the shift. So needless to say, it's pretty creepy. That Saturday in particular, it was me and 2 other receivers for the shift, and both pickers decided not to show up, so it was just the 3 of us in the entire warehouse for 4 hours. Most of the shift went fine. We actually got a lot done in that short time. Needless to say, it went pretty smooth, except when I had to use the bathroom. The only bathroom was on the literal opposite side of the warehouse, about a 3-minute walk. I decided to take the forklift. Again, the warehouse is empty besides the 3 of us, so it was pretty darn creepy just driving a forklift through a dark, empty warehouse. I get to the bathroom, do my business, and leave. To preface what I saw happen, the lights in the warehouse are all motion activated, so just before you go under one it turns on, and that goes for every single light except the one above the main entrance. Anyway, I get back on the forklift, and I feel all creeped out, so I just instantly try and get out of there. As I'm driving down the main path between shipping and all the aisles of car parts, I look towards the aisles, and I start to notice the lights all the way at the end of each one start turning on. Not the ones next to me, but the ones literally on the other end. One by one they turn on, keeping pace with the forklift. But it's not matching the speed, it's just a little bit slower. Eventually I get back to receiving without getting attacked by a demon or anything, and I think it's over. When I walk past the computers my coworkers are working at, I explain what I saw, obviously thinking I sounded like a lunatic. But they gave me shocked and confused expressions at the exact same time. Apparently, as they heard me coming down the long path with the forklift, the radio my supervisor was carrying started to crackle, as if someone was hitting the talk button on the other end with another radio, which stopped just as I turned the corner into receiving, which, if you remember what I said before, there wasn't anyone else besides us in the warehouse, and the channel for the radio was specific to just the handhelds we had in the warehouse. There are plenty of other things that happened in that creepy place, but these were the most significant, and definitely the ones that I can't explain and probably will never be able to. Tales from the Break Room is a viewer-submitted podcast featuring allegedly true scary stories that happened on the way to, on the way from, or at work. If you want your story to be narrated on the show, send it to us at eeriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, we're paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto the show. Submission does not guarantee approval or payment. For a limited time only, PayPal only. Tales from the Break Room is an EerieCast Network original podcast hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him on Twitter at Dark Prevails, and you can hear thousands more stories read by him on our other show, Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also enjoy plenty more horror-themed podcasts at EerieCast.com.
Hello, and welcome to another Let's Read. Today we will be reading Creepy Pasta. The title of today's reading is Ben Drowned. Stay tuned at the end of the audio for an associated video. Post number 1. September 7th, 2010. Okay, X. I need your help with this. This is not copy pasta. This is a long read, but I feel like my safety or well-being could very well depend on this. This is video game related, specifically Majora's Mask, and this is the creepiest shit that has ever happened to me in my entire life. Having said that, I recently moved into my dorm room, starting as a sophomore in college, and a friend of mine gave me his old Nintendo 64 to play. I was stoked, to say the least. I could finally play all those old games of my youth that I hadn't touched in at least a decade. His Nintendo 64 came with one yellow controller and a rather shoddy copy of Super Smash Bros. And while beggars can't be choosers, needless to say, it didn't take long until I became bored of beating up level 9 CPUs. That weekend, I decided to drive around a few neighborhoods about 20 minutes or so off campus, hitting up the local garage sales, hoping to score on some good deals from ignorant parents. I ended up picking up a copy of Pokemon Stadium, GoldenEye, fuck yeah, F-Zero, and 2 other controllers for $2. Satisfied, I began to drive out of the neighborhood when one last house caught my attention. I still have no idea why it did. There were no cars there, and only one table was set up with random junk on it. But something sort of drew me there. I usually trust my gut on these things, so I got out of the car and I was greeted by an old man. His outward appearance was, for lack of a better word, displeasing. It was odd. If you asked me to tell you why I thought he was displeasing, I couldn't really pinpoint anything. There was just something about him that put me on edge. I can't explain it. All I can tell you is that if it wasn't in the middle of the afternoon and there were other people within shouting distance, I would not even thought of approaching this man. He flashed a crook smile at me and asked what I was looking for, and immediately I noticed he must be blind out of one of his eyes. His right eye had that glazed-over look about it. I forced myself to look to his left eye instead, trying not to offend, and I asked him if he had any old video games. I was already wondering how I could politely excuse myself from the situation when he would tell me he had no idea what a video game was, but to my surprise, he said he had a few ones in an old box. He assured me he'd be back in a jiffy, and turned to head back into the garage. As I watched him hobble away, I couldn't help but notice what he was selling on his table. Littered across his table were rather peculiar paintings, various artworks that look like ink blots that a psychiatrist might show you. Curious, I looked through them. It was obvious why no one was visiting this guy's garage sale. These weren't exactly aesthetically pleasing. As I came to the last one, for some reason it looked almost like Majora's Mask. The same heart-shaped body, with little spikes protruding outward. Initially I just thought that since I was secretly hoping to find that game at these garage sales, some Freudian bullshit was projecting itself into the inkblots, but given the events that happened afterward, I'm not so sure now. I should have asked the man about it. I wish I would have asked the man about it. After staring at the Majora-shaped blot, I looked up, and the old man was suddenly there again, arm's length in front of me, smiling at me. I'll admit, I jumped out of reflex and laughed nervously as he handed me a Nintendo 64 cartridge. It was the standard gray color, except that someone had written Majora on it in black permanent marker. I got butterflies in my stomach as I realized what a coincidence this was, and asked him how much he wanted for it. The old man smiled at me and told me that I could have it for free, that it used to belong to a kid who was about my age that didn't live here anymore. There was something weird about how the man phrased that, but I didn't really pay any attention to it then. I was too caught up in not only finding this game, but getting it for free. I reminded myself to be a bit skeptical since this looked like a pretty shady cartridge and there's no guarantee it would work. But then the optimist inside me interjected that maybe it was some kind of beta version or pirated version of the game, and that was all I needed to be back on Cloud 9. I thanked the man, and the man smiled at me and wished me well, saying, "Goodbye then." At least that's what it sounded like to me. All the way on the car ride home, I had a nagging doubt that the old man had said something else. My fears were confirmed when I booted up the game. To my surprise, it worked just fine, and there was one save file simply named Ben. "Goodbye, Ben." He was saying, "Goodbye, Ben." I felt bad for the man, obviously a grandparent and obviously going senile, and I, for some reason or another, reminded him of his grandson, Ben. Out of curiosity, I looked at the save file. Eyeballing it, I could tell that he was pretty far in the game. He had almost all of the masks and 3/4 remains of the bosses. I noticed he had used an owl statue to save his game. He was on day 3, and by the Stone Tower Temple with hardly an hour left before the moon would crash. I remember thinking that it was a shame that he had come so close to beating the game, but he never finished it. I made a new file named Link out of tradition and started the game, ready to relive my childhood. For such a shady-looking game cartridge, I was impressed at how smoothly it ran. Literally just like a retail copy of the game, save for a few minor hiccups here and there, like textures being where they shouldn't be, random flashes of cutscenes at odd intervals, but nothing too bad. However, the only thing that was a little unnerving was that at times the NPCs would call me Link, and other times they would call me Ben. I figured it was just a bug, a fluke in the programming causing our files to get mixed up or something. It did kind of creep me out though after a while, and it was around after I'd beaten the Wood Falls Temple that I regrettably went in to save the files and deleted Ben. I had intended to preserve the file just out of respect of the game's original owner. It's not like I needed 2 files anyways. Hoping that would solve the problem, it did and it didn't. Now the NPCs wouldn't call me anything. Where my name should be in the dialogue, there was just a blank space. My save file name was still called Link though. Frustrated and with homework to do, I put the game down for a day. I started playing the game again last night, getting the lens of truth and working my way towards completing the Snowhead Temple. Now, some of you more hardcore Majora's Mask players know about the 4th day glitch. For those who do not, you can Google it, but the gist of it is that right as the clock is about to hit 000000 on the final day, midnight, you talk to the astronomer and look through the telescope. If you time it right, the countdown disappears, and you essentially have another day to finish whatever you were doing. Deciding to do the glitch and try to finish the Snow Temple, I happened to get it right on the first try, and the time counter at the bottom disappeared. However, when I pressed B to exit the telescope, instead of being greeted by the astronomer, I found myself in the Majora boss fight room at the end of the game, the trippy boxed-in area, staring at Skull Kid hovering above me. There was no sound, just him floating in the air above me, and the background music, which was regular for the area but still creepy. Immediately my palms began to sweat. This was definitely not normal. Skull Kid never appeared here. I tried moving around the area, and no matter where I went, Skull Kid would always be facing me, looking at me, not saying anything. Nothing would happen though, and this kept up for around 60 seconds. I thought the game had bugged or something, but I was beginning to doubt that very much. I was about to reach for the reset button when text appeared on my screen. "You're not sure why, but you apparently had a reservation." I instantly recognized that text. You get that message when you get the room key from Anju at the Stockpot Inn. But why was it playing here? I refused to entertain the notion that it was almost as if the game was trying to communicate with me. I started to navigate the room again, testing to see if that was some sort of trigger that enabled me to interact with something here. Then I realized how stupid I was. To even think that someone could reprogram the game like this was absurd. Sure enough, 15 seconds later, another message appeared on the screen, and again, like the first one, it was already a pre-existing phrase. Go to the lair of the temple's boss? Yes, no. I paused for a second, contemplating what I should press and how the game would react, when I realized that I couldn't select no. Taking a deep breath, I pressed yes, and the screen faded to white with the words, Dawn of a New Day. Where I was ported filled me with the most intense sense of dread and impending fear that I'd ever experienced. The only way I can describe the way I felt here is having this feeling of inexplicable depression on a profound scale. I am normally not a depressed person, but the way I felt here was a feeling that I didn't even know existed. It was such a twisted, powerful presence that seemed to wash over me. I appeared in some kind of weird Twilight Zone version of Clocktown. I walked out of the Clocktown, as you normally do when you start from day one, only to find that all of the inhabitants were gone. Usually with the fourth day glitch, you can still find the guards and the dog that runs around outside the tower. This time they were all gone. What replaced them was the ominous feeling that there was something out there in the same area as me and that it was watching me. I had 4 hearts to my name and the hero's bow, but at this point, I wasn't even considered for my avatar. I felt that I personally was in some kind of danger. Perhaps the most chilling thing was the music. It was the song of healing, ripped straight from the game itself, but played in reverse. The music would get louder, building up so as if you should expect something to pop out at you, but nothing ever did. And the constant loop began to wear on my mental state. Every now and then, I would hear the faint laugh of the happy mask salesman in the background, just quiet enough so that I wasn't sure if I was just hearing things, but just loud enough to keep me determined to find him. I looked in all 4 zones of Clocktown, only to find nothing. No one. Textures were missing. West Clocktown had me walking on air. The entire area felt broken, hopelessly broken. As a reverse song of healing repeated for what must have been the 50th time, I just remember standing in the middle of South Clocktown, realizing that I'd never felt so alone in a video game before. As I walked through the ghost town, I don't know whether it was the combination of the out-of-place textures and the atmosphere and the haunting melody of the once peaceful and soothing song being bunched together and distorted, but I was literally on the verge of tears and I had no idea why. I hardly ever cry. Something had gripped me here in this powerful sense of depression that was both foreign and crippling. I tried leaving Clocktown, but every time I attempted to zone out, the screen would fade to black and I would just zone into another part of Clocktown. I tried playing my ocarina. I wanted to escape, and I did not want to be here. But every time I played the Song of Time or Song of Soaring, it would only say, "Your notes echo far, but nothing happens." By this point, it was obvious the game didn't want me to leave, but I had no idea why it was keeping me here. I didn't want to go inside the buildings. I felt that I would be too vulnerable there to whatever I was terrified of. I don't know why, but I came up with the idea that maybe if I drowned myself at the laundry pool, I could spawn somewhere else and leave this place. As I zoned in and ran towards the pool, that's when it happened. Link grabbed his head, and the screen flashed for a brief moment of the happy masked salesman smiling at me not Link. Me with Skull Kid's scream playing in the background. When the screen returned, I was staring at the Link statue from playing the song Elegy of Emptiness. I screamed as the thing just stared back at me with the haunting facial expression. I turned around and ran out and back into South Clocktown. And to my horror, the fucking statue followed me in. The only way I can compare this is like the weeping angels from Doctor Who. Every so often, at random intervals, the animation would play of the statue appearing behind me. It was like the thing was chasing me, or I don't even want to fucking say it, haunting me. By this point, I was on the verge of hysterics, but not even once did the thought of turning off the console occur to me. I don't know why, I was so wrapped up in it. The terror felt all so real. I tried to shake the statue, but it would literally appear right behind me every single time. Link started to begin to make weird animations I had never seen him do before. He would flail his arms around or spasm randomly, and the screen would cut to the happy masked salesman smiling again for a brief moment before I was face to face with that fucking statue again. I ended up running into the swordsman's dojo and ran to the back. I don't know why, but in my panic I just wanted some kind of assurance that I'm not alone here. To my dismay, I found no one. But as I turned to leave, the statue cornered me in the cubby in the back. I tried attacking the statue with my sword, but to no avail. Confused and backed into a corner, I just stared at the statue, waiting for it to kill me. Suddenly, the screen flashed again to the happy masked salesman, and Link turned to face my screen, standing upright, mirroring the statue, looking at me along with his copy, literally staring at me. Whatever was left on the fourth wall was completely shattered while I ran out of the dojo terrified. Suddenly, the game warped me to an underground tunnel, and the reverse song of healing queued up again as I was given a brief moment of rest before the statue started appearing behind me again, this time aggressively. I could only take a few steps before it would summon behind me again. I hurriedly made my way out of the tunnel and appeared in South Clocktown. As I ran aimlessly in sheer panic, suddenly a re-dead screamed, and the screen faded to black as dawn of a new day appeared again. The screen faded in, and I was standing on top of Clock Tower with Skull Kid hovering over me again, silent. I looked up, and the moon was back, looming just meters above my head, but the Skull Kid just stared at me hauntingly with that fucking mask. A new song was playing. The Stone Tower Temple theme played in reverse. In some sort of desperate attempt, I equipped my bow and fired off a shot at the Skull Kid, and it actually hit him, and he played an animation of him reeling back. I fired again, and on the third arrow a text box appeared. "That won't do you any good." And I was picked up off the ground, levitated upwards on my back, and then Link's scream as he burst into flames, instantly killing him. I jumped when this happened. I had never seen this move used by anyone in the game, and Skull Kid himself didn't have any moves. As the death screen played, my lifeless body still burning, the Skull Kid laughed and the screen faded to black, only to have me reappear in the same place. I decided to charge him, but the same thing happened. Link's body was lifted off the ground by some unknown force, and he immediately burst into flames, again killing him. This time during the death scene, the faint sounds of the reverse song of healing could be heard. On my third and final try, I noticed that there was no music playing this time, that all there was eerie silence. I remembered that in the original encounter with the Skull Kid, you were supposed to use the ocarina to either travel back in time or summon the giants. I attempted to play the Song of Time, but before I could hit the last note, Link's body once again horrifically exploded into flames and he died. As the death screen neared its end, it began to chug, as if the cartridge was trying to process a lot of something. When the screen came to, it was the same scene as the first 3 times, except this time Link was lying on the ground dead, in a position I had never seen in the game before, his head tilted towards the camera, with a Skull Kid floating above him. I couldn't move. I couldn't press any buttons. All I could do is just stare at Link's dead body. After around 30 seconds of this, the game simply fades out with the message, "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" before kicking you out to the title screen. Upon getting back to the title screen and starting again, I noticed my save file was no longer there. Instead of Link, it was replaced with Your Turn. Your Turn had 3 hearts, 0 masks, and no items. I selected Your Turn, and immediately when I did this, I was returned to the clock tower rooftop scene of my Link dead and the Skull Kid hovering over, with the Skull Kid's laugh looping again and again. I quickly hit the reset button, and when the game booted up again, there was one more save file added below Your Turn, entitled Ben. Ben's save file was right back where it was before I deleted it, at the Stone Tower Temple with the moon almost crashing. I turned the game off at that point. I'm not superstitious, but this is way too fucked up even for me. I haven't played it at all today. Hell, I didn't even get any sleep last night. I kept hearing the reverse song of healing music in my head, and just remembering the sense of dread I felt exploring Clocktown. I drove back to the old man's house today to ask him some questions with a buddy of mine. No way I was going there alone. Only to find that there's a for sale sign in the front yard, and when I rang the door, no one was home. So now I'm back here writing down the rest of my thoughts and recording what happened. Sorry if some of this has grammatical errors and whatnot. I'm running on no sleep here. I'm terrified of this game, even more so now that I've relived it a second time writing this all down. But I feel like there's still more to it than meets the eye, and that there's something calling me to investigate this further. I think Ben is something in this equation. I don't know what. And if I could get a hold of the old man, then I would be able to find some answers. I need another day or 2 to recuperate before tackling this game again. It's already taken a toll on my sanity, I feel like. But next time I do this, I'm going to be recording my footage all the way through. The idea to record only came to me towards the end. So you see the last few minutes of what I saw, including Skull Kid and the elegy statue. But it's on YouTube here. I'm going to stay in this thread for a little while longer before I fall asleep to answer any questions you guys might have, or hopefully listen to your ideas or theories to help me shed some light into this. Or maybe things I should try to do. I think I'm going to play Ben's file tomorrow to see what happens. Maybe I was supposed to do that all along. I don't believe in paranormal shit, but this is a little fucked up. Maybe this Ben is just a really good hacker/programmer. I don't want to think about the alternatives if he isn't. That's the end of the copy-paste. I'm hoping that maybe this is some kind of running gag the developers had, and that other people have gotten gag or hacked copies of the game like this. This just really scares me. Welcome to another Let's Read. Today, Ben Drowned, post number 3, September 10th, 2010. I know it's early in the morning. I've stayed up all night. I can't sleep. I don't care if people see this. That's not the point. I just want the word to get spread so I don't suffer for nothing. I've lost the will to type about this. The less I dwell on this, the better. I think the video just speaks for itself. I did what you guys told me to do. I played the Elegy of Emptiness song at the first prompt by the game I was given. But I think that's what the game, or Ben, Jesus Christ, I can't believe I'm even humoring the absurd idea that he exists in the game, wanted me to do. He's following me now. Not just in the game, he's in my dreams. I can see him all the time, behind my back, just watching me. I haven't gone to any of my classes. I've stayed in my dorm room with the windows closed and the blinds shut. That way I know he can't watch me. But he still gets me when I play. When I play, he can still see me. The game is scaring me now. It talked